It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. That's Darwin, of course. And wow, does that quote hit home today? Really frames the massive challenge we're facing. How do we keep feeding everyone when climate change is just hammering our essential crops? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging right into the really cutting-edge science and tech being used to fortify our crops against this assault. We've got some fantastic source materials for you, specifically drawing on expert insights published in the print. Our mission, as always, is to pull out the key nuggets of knowledge for you. We want to give you a clear, engaging, hopefully comprehensive picture of how science is actually fighting back. And look, this isn't just, academically interesting. It's vital for understanding current affairs, environmental challenges, farming, sustainability, and these incredible scientific leaps happening right here in India. So if you're a UPSC aspirant needing that crucial current affairs context remains GSAN 3, I think environment, agriculture, sci-tech, or honestly, if you're just curious about the future of our food, this deep dive is definitely for you.
It absolutely is. And the urgency. Well, it's palpable. Agriculture in India is just so sensitive to climate impacts. We're seeing everything from crazy rainfall patterns to rising soil salinity, brutal temperatures. But what's really striking in the sources is that scientists aren't just tinkering around the edges. They're pushing for fundamental changes, multifaceted solutions to really build resilience.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Why are our crops struggling so much right now? What's the core issue?
Well, the sources paint a pretty stark picture. You've got unseasonable rains hitting them, high salt levels in the soil poisoning them, summers getting harsher and literally scorching them. And on top of all that, they're becoming way more vulnerable to pests, some of which are also evolving because of the climate shifts. PV Shivaprasad, he's the Associate Dean of Research at Bengaluru's National Center for Biological Sciences. He puts it very bluntly. He says, "We have pampered our plants so much that they have lost their ability to fight against what's trying to kill them." Yeah, and that context he provides is critical. He links this directly back to the Green Revolution. Now, don't get me wrong, the Green Revolution was absolutely essential. It was vital for boosting grain production, fighting famine here in India. But an unintended consequence, as Shivaprasad points out, was that it effectively shut down all their resistance mechanisms.
Right.
So generations later, our modern crop varieties are, they're weaker. They're less equipped to handle the kind of rapid climate shifts we're seeing now. And understanding that history really explains the urgency driving scientists today. They're trying to sort of reverse that, build that toughness back in.
Exactly. Which leads to this really fundamental shift in priorities. Shivaprasad actually says, and this really struck me, yield is secondary. But first, we have to ensure crops can cope with climate change. Resilience first, then yield. That's a big change in thinking. And the first major solution the sources really dig into is gene editing for precisely that. Resilience. Shivaprasad's own team at NCBS, they're working on de-domesticating rice to make it super salt resistant.
Right, and this is a crucial point, especially if you're studying this, maybe for UPSC or just trying to get your head around it. Gene editing is not the same as creating GMOs, genetically modified organisms. With GMOs, the process involves introducing foreign genetic material like DNA from a different species altogether to change the plant. Gene editing, though, it's different. It's about making very precise changes to the plant's own existing genes, tweaking what's already there. And crucially, the idea is that the final plant, the one that goes out to the field, shouldn't contain any of that introduced foreign DNA used to make the edit. If it did, it'd be classed as transgenic. Different rules apply. Big difference.
Okay, that distinction is super helpful. Clears up a lot of common confusion, I think. So what exactly does Shivaprasad's team do? How does this work at the, molecular level? They focused on these things called histones. You can picture them like tiny spools that the DNA wraps itself around inside the cell nucleus. And they figured out how to use these histones to basically switch genes on or off. Their big breakthrough was identifying a specific protein called H4/V. Turns out this H4/V protein works like a really precise genetic switch. Under normal conditions, it keeps certain stress response genes turned off. But when the plant encounters high salinity, high salt conditions, this H4/V flips the switch, turns those protective genes on, and helps the rice plant survive. Pretty clever, right?
It's incredibly precise. And what's fascinating from their research, as you mentioned, is that in the edited plants, those stress genes were sort of pre-activated. They were already switched on, even without salt stress. So when they did expose these edited plants to salty conditions, the plants didn't show an additional stress response because, they were already prepared. H4V had done its job in advance.
Wow, so they're basically battle ready from the start.
Exactly, primed for stress. And their results They were published in a top journal, Nature Plants, back in April last year. So this is peer-reviewed, validated science.
And this precision, this ability to pre-arm the plants, it's really something.
It absolutely is. And connecting this to the bigger picture, India is actually quite ahead of the curve here, globally speaking. Just last May, India announced the world's first gene-edited rice varieties ready for the field, DRR Dan 100 and Pusa DST Rice 1. The trial results were really quite remarkable. We're talking about potentially 19% higher yields, a 20% cut in greenhouse gas emissions from cultivation, and obviously that improved tolerance to drought, salt, and other climate stresses.
19% higher yield and lower emissions, that's huge.
It's a very big deal. And it's not just happening in India, though India is leading with rice. You see similar gene editing efforts globally. In the U.S., they're editing cherries, so they need less cold weather to fruit. Cauliflowers are being tweaked to have a kind of built-in sunscreen against harsh sunlight. In the UK, researchers are editing rice's stomatal density, those tiny pores on the leaves, to help them cope better with salty water and drought. It's a global push.
Okay, this is getting really interesting now because it's clearly not just about salt tolerance, right?
Yeah.
The science is tackling multiple issues. Our sources mention other teams too, like the Swesti Tava's group at TIGS, the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society, also in Bengaluru. They're using gene editing on rice, but for herbicide tolerance, which sounds maybe less dramatic, but it solves a massive practical problem for farmers. You need herbicides to kill weeds, but often those chemicals also damage the crop itself.
Exactly. So Tawa's team is working on making deep-rooted rice varieties tougher against these chemicals. This is particularly important for what's called aerobic cultivation. That's growing rice without flooded paddies, which saves a lot of water, but it also means the plants and the weeds are more directly exposed to any herbicides used. So tolerant varieties are key.
And the process they use, it highlights that gene editing point again, right?
It does. They might initially introduce foreign DNA, these things called transgenes that act like molecular scissors to make the specific cut or edit they want in the rice DNA. But then, and this is a really important step for the gene editing classification, they grow the plant through several generations. For rice, maybe 2 or 3. And during that process, they ensure that any of that initial foreign scissor DNA is bred out. So the final plant, the one intended for farmers, is stable and, critically, free of any foreign genetic material. That's what makes it edited, not transgenic. It's a meticulous process.
Right. Meticulous is the word. And there's more. On the same campus, basically, at CCampy, the Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms, there's an entrepreneur, Vivekanand Tiwari. His startup, Vitacrop Technologies, is focused on something else. Improving photosynthesis, the plant's basic energy-making process, specifically for drought resistance.
Yes, his work is fascinating too. He identified a particular protein and found that by tweaking it, they could actually increase its energy storing capacity. This translates into the rice plant being more efficient at photosynthesis, especially under harsh conditions. So it performs better, yields more, even when water is scarce.
So we've got salt tolerance, herbicide tolerance, better photosynthesis for drought. It's a whole toolkit being developed.
Precisely. And all these different gene editing approaches, they all point towards one overarching goal: helping farmers adapt, giving them crops that can actually handle these tougher environmental conditions. We're seeing more and more. It's about sustaining productivity, ensuring food security. As Kutubuddin Mullah, a senior scientist at the ICAR Central Rice Research Institute, puts it quite clearly, developing climate-resilient crops is a top priority for ensuring food security in India. It's fundamental.
Okay, so stepping back for a second, what does this all mean when you put it together? It feels like it's not just about the genetics inside the plant, right? There's more to adapting than just editing genes. The sources definitely bring this out. Beyond gene editing, there's this whole other layer of technology coming in: drones, artificial intelligence, geospatial tech. Let's talk about drones for a minute. The work of Devan Chandrasekaran at Fuselage Innovations sounds really promising.
It really does. He identified a key limitation with traditional methods. Farmers often rely on satellite imagery to monitor crop health, but, clouds are a big problem. Especially during monsoon season, large areas of cropland can be completely obscured from satellite view for days or weeks.
Ah, okay. So satellites aren't always reliable for that real-time picture.
Exactly. So Chandrasekaran's solution: aerial drones. These can fly under the clouds, scan a field quickly, and use sensors to analyze crop health, even pinpoint specific nutrient deficiencies. This data then allows the farmer to apply fertilizers or pesticides much more precisely, only where needed. It's not just efficient, it's a huge boost for sustainable farming. Less waste, less chemical runoff.
That makes so much sense. And where do you get the idea?
Interestingly, the sources say it was sparked by a UN report he read about the massive topsoil loss in Kerala after the devastating floods back in 2018. He saw a problem and applied his engineering skills to find a practical, tech-based solution at the farm level.
That's a great example of innovation meeting a real need. But I imagine getting something like that off the ground isn't easy.
Absolutely not. The sources mention he really struggled to get funding, especially during the COVID period in 2020, apparently walked in and out of a dozen banks.
Yeah, perseverance clearly paid off. He got an initial grant from TCS, incubated the startup at Maker Village, and even got support from UNDP India, which shows the recognition of the potential impact.
And he's actually selling these drones now.
Yes, the source mentioned he'd sold around 200 drones, mainly to farmers in Kerala so far. It's starting to make a difference on the ground.
And there was another use case for these drones mentioned too, wasn't there? Something about pests.
That's right, and it's quite forward-thinking. Using drones to identify early signs of new bug strains evolving, perhaps driven by the changing weather patterns. Spotting them early allows for targeted chemical sprays before these new pests mature and potentially cause widespread crop damage. It's about proactive adaptation to evolving threats. Wow, so you have the internal resilience from gene editing and then this external surveillance and precision management from drones.
Exactly. And this raises that key question. How do all these pieces fit together? How do they synergize? It seems India's policy framework is trying to encourage exactly that synergy. Remember Mission Methane? The Union Cabinet approved it last September. It's got a significant budget, ours 2,000 crore over 2 years. And its stated goal is to make India weather ready and climate smart. How? Through better observations, better climate modeling, better forecasting, so you can see the connections. You have gene editing, creating more robust seeds. You have drones providing real-time on-farm data. And you have initiatives like Mission Methane providing better weather and climate intelligence. It's about equipping farmers with a whole suite of tools, biological and technological, to combat these extreme changes, whether it's erratic monsoons, heat stress, or drought. It feels like a much more holistic approach.
What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. Seriously, from the almost invisible world of gene editing, getting plants to arm themselves from within, right up to the bird's eye view of drone surveillance managing fields from above. And it's all aimed at one thing: making our agriculture tougher, more resilient against climate change. And, what really comes through in the sources is the personal connection for some of these scientists. Like Tiwari and Shivaprasad, they both come from farming backgrounds. This isn't just abstract science for them. They understand that for the farmer on the ground, survival and yield, they're everything. As Tiwari said, farmers care about what gives them that extra 10–20% yield because, well, their livelihood literally depends on it.
That's absolutely right. It grounds the science in reality. And perhaps, given all these incredible advancements we've discussed, a final thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. As we develop these powerful tools to fundamentally reshape our food sources for resilience, what are the next set of ethical questions or policy considerations we need to grapple with? And maybe even more pressing, particularly for a country like India with millions of smallholder farmers, how do we ensure these amazing innovations actually reach everyone? How quickly can we bridge that gap between the lab and the land, especially in remote areas, to truly secure food and prosperity for all? That's the big ongoing challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely. A crucial question to keep in mind. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a valuable shortcut to understanding these critical challenges and the really inspiring science working to solve them. If you found this useful, especially if you're tracking current affairs for exams or just want to stay informed, please do like this deep dive. Subscribe to the deep dive so you don't miss our future explorations. And definitely leave us a comment. Any questions you still have or other topics you'd like us to unpack like this, let us know. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.